The subject for the day, honorable members, which is the first item on the order paper, is the subject for discussion in the name of Honorable S.N. Swart on implications of the declaration of the national state of disaster and the planned appointment of the Minister of Electricity as responses to the current energy crisis. I now recognize the Honorable S.N. Swart.
Thank you, House Chair. Business and the economy. Existential threat to business and the economy. He then announced the national state of disaster and the appointment of a Minister of Electricity as responses. Now, the ACDP shares the doubts of many that these steps will solve the systemic problems at Eskom. It is clear, however, that state capture and corruption hollowed out Eskom's financial resources and its experienced and skilled personnel. A staggering 14.7 billion rand of Eskom's contracts were afflicted by state capture. And just when we thought that state capture and corruption at Eskom had largely been exposed, further alarming allegations began surfacing that corruption at the utility is not only ongoing, but reaching newer and higher levels of intensity. Former Eskom CEO Andre de Ruyter's explosive ETV interview has further exposed the rot and implicated unnamed politicians at cabinet level. Up to a staggering 1 billion rand is allegedly being stolen per month from Eskom. That's 12 billion rand per year, not to mention the greater knock-on effect on our already struggling economy. The ACDP commends Mr. de Ruyter for his courageous stance, but regrets that he did not lay criminal charges as he should have done under PRECO legislation. The information was not, however, kept secret. It was shared, and one trusts that it is being investigated. The impact of corruption is lucidly stated by Mr. de Ruyter in a recent affidavit where he states, corruption has compromised Eskom's financial position, its board and management structures, reduced its coal supply security, degraded its power stations through the use of out-of-specification coal, and thereby negatively impacted its generation capacity. In addition to corruption, Mr. de Ruyter explains that the rolling blackouts are attributable to a combination of running coal-powered plants harder and deferring maintenance. Unplanned plant breakdowns and reduced available capacity compels further increases in the usage of the working plants and then continued deferral of planned maintenance outages. Will the declaration of a national state of disaster and the planned appointment of a Minister of Electricity help solve this critical situation? Or will it, as many people believe, make a bad situation even worse? Under the regulations, cabinet ministers can issue any directions within their area of focus to address the current electricity shortfall and prevent an escalation of the energy crisis. Essential infrastructure for which exemptions may be granted include health, water, sewerage, rail, ports, food production, and storage, where technically feasible. The regulations also cover relaxing environmental impact controls and developing feed-in tariffs for individuals and businesses to sell electricity into the grid. Now, these regulations could allow for quick and dirty repairs to Kusile Power Station and potentially fast-tracking the already highly controversial car powership project without, in our view, proper parliamentary oversight. Other arguments raised against the state of disaster are, firstly, it appears that neither Eskom nor the government departments have a proper plans to solve the power utilities problems in the short term. Secondly, the electricity crisis can, in our view, be addressed under existing legislation and procedures. Thirdly, declaring a state of disaster and bypassing certain procedures will create even more opportunities for fraud and corruption. This is particularly so when one considers many irrational regulations under the COVID-19 state of disaster, impacting thousands of businesses and more than 1 million jobs. The potential for further fraud and corruption of the kind experienced in the emergency procurement of PPEs is real. Additionally, we as parliamentarians have no say over these new electricity regulations or even how long the state of disaster will last. The country could be under a permanent state of disaster for all we know. Parliamentary oversight would have been substantially improved had we passed Dr. Groenewold's Disaster Management Amendment Bill. It would have meant that only the National Assembly could implement or extend this national state of disaster after a proper debate and vote. Now, Section 27 of the Disaster Management Act provides that a national disaster may only be declared if existing legislation does not adequately provide the national executive to effectively deal with a disaster. If one considers other existing legislation that could have been used, Section 34 of the Electricity Regulation Act era already empowers the Minister of Mineral Resources and Energy to procure new energy capacity to ensure the uninterrupted supply of electricity. There's nothing, in our view, in what is being sought by declaring the national state of disaster that enables swifter action than that is already possible under ERA. Secondly, Section 16 of the PFMA already empowers the Minister of Finance to authorize the use of funds from national revenue. This is an extraordinary power that bypasses the ordinary appropriation of funds through Parliament and enables the Minister of Finance to respond efficiently to situations of urgent and emergency need. The declaration of the national state of disaster and the planned Ministry of Electricity appears to be little more than an attempt to sidestep the root causes of the energy crisis. These include the lack of coordination, cooperation, planning, and the political agreement between existing ministries and ESCOM that is sorely lacking. I thank you.
Thank you, Honourable House Chairperson. The ACDP is aware that the newly gazetted National State of Disaster regulations aim to assist, protect, provide relief to the public, protect property, prevent and combat disruption, and to deal with the destructive nature and other effects of the disaster by minimizing the impact of load shedding on livelihoods, the economy, policing functions, national security, security services, education services, health services, water services, food security, communications, and municipal services, among others. Now, all of these measures should have been in place and implemented before and without a national state of disaster. And they are measures which are indicative of poor governance. The same can be said of the appointment of a Minister of Electricity. The regulations may have been palatable had it not been for the fact that the originators of the disaster regulations are responsible for the disaster itself. The ACDP has from the outset indicated that we are opposed to the declaration of a national state of disaster, largely due to the fact that the last state of disaster was supposed to protect lives and livelihoods. Yet, despite one of the harshest lockdowns in the world, with some of the most ludicrous regulations, South Africa had the highest mortality rate of all African countries. Additionally, we lost some 3 million jobs in the process, adding to the burden of livelihoods. And during that last state of disaster, the constitutional mandate of members of parliament to hold ministers and cabinet to account, particularly with the passing of national legislation, was often bypassed. Now, President Cyril Ramaphosa's statement that government is not constitutionally obligated to provide South Africans with electricity is an insensitive, cowardly, shameful attempt at deflecting responsibility, while billions of rands are siphoned off and the feeding frenzy continues. All of this while South Africans strain under the weight of increased crime, poverty, unemployment, and a crumbling health sector where lives are lost due to load shedding. The ANC and ESCOM have become the greatest threat to South Africa. And come 2024, we call on South Africans to choose caring, ethical, and trustworthy leaders, such as are found in the ACDP. I thank you.
The Honorable Swart.
Thank you, House Chair. House Chair, the ACDP would like to thank all members who participated in this crucial debate, given that the regulations were only gazetted this week. And while Parliament has no say over the contents of the regulations or how long they will last, it has given us the opportunity to discuss the implications. And we are indeed, as the Honourable Groenewald says, dealing with a disaster created by the ANC itself. And Mr. Marlin correctly asserts that the disaster management is to allow unfettered plundering of state coffers at taxpayers' expense. The Honourable Nkosi Buthelezi says the country deserves better, and we agree. Honourable Makunazi accuses the ACDP of electioneering. This is not true. We are facing an unprecedented crisis, but we are grateful to my friend, the Honourable Judith Shabalala, for electioneering on our behalf and reminding voters of the ACDP's proposed solutions to the energy crisis. And we would add that we need servant leaders who understand good stewardship of state resources. where resources are used wisely, honestly, and effectively. The implementation of these regulations by various ministers could, if they are not applied properly and honestly, lead to a true disaster, a total energy blackout that none of us want. And that is the ACDP's deepest concerns, that the ANC government could, well, as in the past, instruct Eskom to keep the lights on at all costs, to try and placate anger expressed by many South Africans who are struggling under rolling blackouts and win-back support. And this could mean deferring required maintenance and running the power stations even harder, leading to a possible blackout that we all need to avoid at all costs. Honourable Chair, Honourable Kachale says the ANC has one last chance. Please prove us and the opposition wrong and do the right thing and ensure lasting and efficient energy security for all in the country.
Thank you, Honorable Member. Thank you very much, Honorable Swart. Honorable members, I must apologize. I'm load shedded. I know it's not good for the chairperson not to be on the screen, and I'm actually using a phone because the bigger gadgets could not work. My apologies for that, and that, honorable members, concludes this debate. Thank you.